City of Canby, good evening. Welcome to the Monday, February 13th, 2023 Planning Commission meeting. Please join us and stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We will move on to the consent items of the evening. We have two separate draft meeting minutes that need adoption, so we'll turn it over to Dawn to talk about one of those in particular that has some minor revision.
Thank you, Chair Ellison. The minutes from January 9th, 2023, it's come to the staff's attention that there's a need to have a very minor edit to on page 5 of that for the historic overlay for the depot. And it's on page 5 of the minutes from January 9th. It's on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 5th paragraph down starts with Commissioner Jarosh thanks Palmer for her volunteer efforts to make this process, let me read this again. Commissioner Jarosh thanks Palmer for her volunteer efforts to make this proposal happen. And the next sentence that says, she mentioned that the location of Pine where the depot currently is was not planned to be the permanent spot. In looking at this further, the reference was really to the original depot location and not the future depot location. So staff is proposing the following language in that sentence, and it would read, the railroad was not going to allow it, and then parentheses, the depot to stay where it was. And with that, everything else, staff, there's no other changes.
Okay,
so I'd like to make a recommendation to amend that, the minutes there, and turn it back to Planning Commission for both sets of minutes.
All right, so we're gonna do things just a little bit differently. We'll ask for a motion to approve. If we get a second, we're gonna do kind of a roll call style where each commissioner will be called out to go ahead and approve yes or no. Sound good? Okay, so do we have a motion to approve both sets of minutes with the aforementioned revision?
I move we approve both sets of minutes with the stated revisions.
Do we have a second?
This is Judy, I second.
Very good. So we'll roll call it. We'll start with Mr. Hutchinson.
I approve.
Mr. Ewert.
Approve.
Mr. Roche.
Approve.
And I approve. All in.
Great.
I approve too.
Oh, Greg, sorry. I apologize. My deep apologies, Craig. I'm sorry. Thank you, Craig. Okay, all approved.
Next item, Chair Ellison, would be citizen input and requesting if there's any folks that would like to have citizen input.
Okay. Citizen input on non-agenda items. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address the Planning Commission on non-agenda items. Each person will be given 3 minutes to speak. Staff and Planning Commission will make every effort to respond to the questions raised during citizens input before the meeting ends or as quickly as possible thereafter. Are there new or non-agenda items?
Any citizen input? Lainey, do you have anybody online? Okay.
Okay, no agenda or non-agenda items from citizen input. So we'll move on to new business. There is none. So we'll move on to public hearings. There is none. And we'll move on to the Planning Commission work session. The purpose of tonight's work session is to give the Planning Commission the opportunity to discuss the comprehensive plan, update, and Planning Commission involvement. To make the most of the short time we are given for these work sessions, public comment will not be taken. Instead, we invite public comment at all of the Planning Commission's regular meetings under either of the 2 opportunities dedicated on each agenda for public comment. In addition, we invite the public to contact city staff with comments or concerns. Although this is a public meeting, the Planning Commission cannot make any formal decision in a work session. Next step actions are often determined for deliberation and discussion at a properly noticed Planning Commission hearing. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our presenter, Don Hardy, our Planning Director. Take it away.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to start out, first of all, can the folks watching via Zoom, can you see our screen here? Is that clear to you?
Very clear.
Okay, great. So this is a continuation of some discussion and also some new information tonight on the comprehensive plan update process that we have just begun. There's a kickoff meeting that we just had with the consultant, 3J Consulting. There's other firms involved, but they're the lead in the process. And this is an opportunity to kind of go back through how this also fits into the housing needs analysis, housing production strategy, and economic opportunity analysis. Kind of all, how does this all intertwine and what we've done to date and what we're moving forward with. So it's going to be a little bit of a integrated discussion tonight. My hope tonight is to go through this work session with you all, and also I have a suggestion for the Planning Commission's involvement. I would like your input on that as part of this process, and that would be dealing with code updates as we go through the housing portion of the comprehensive plan process. So with that, I'm going to start out with the first slide. This, again, gives kind of an overview of where we're at in the process. I have a little more detail on some slides coming up, but we have the economic opportunity analysis, which we essentially housing production strategy and economic opportunity analysis. Those are going forward. There'll be a joint work session. I'll go through this in a moment on March 1st with the Planning Commission and City Council to go through what's happened to date on those two. There's also some hearings coming up, and I'll cover that in a moment. Transportation system plan and the comprehensive plan have both started. As part of that process, there's also an anticipated urban growth boundary expansion based on the housing needs analysis and the economic opportunity analysis in looking at the land base within the city of Canby. So tonight, again, really kind of focusing down on what we're going to be talking about as code efficiency measures for housing, what those are, why they're in the mix here, as why we're talking about them, proposed housing strategies, proposed employment growth scenarios, and proposed employment objectives. So this kind of boils down the screen here, and I wanted to also make a plug. There was a January 24th public open house that covered the housing and employment side of things. There's also a survey, and I would encourage you all to take that. It's online. If you have not received that, Jamie Stickle from our economic director sent that out to a number of parties. I thought she sent that to the Planning Commission, but if not, and also for the public listening online, it can be accessed through our city website through Development Service Portal, and then there's a link to that. We would like comments by this Friday, so those can be addressed at the Housing Advisory Committee coming up next week on February 22nd, that information can be part of that. We have received a number of responses so far. This is as of last week, and so it has definitely picked up, and we're hoping to get a lot more responses as well. It's valuable input as we move this process forward. That input will also be discussed at the March 1st joint work session with the Planning Commission and City Council on the direction that we've received from the public. On March 13th, there'll be a Planning Commission hearing for the housing production strategy. And that'll be stuff we've covered before, but those are strategies basically to address housing need and also housing affordability. On March 27th, there'll be a Planning Commission hearing for the economic opportunity analysis, and that will be covering employment scenarios and also objectives. And then on April 19th, the housing production strategy will go to council for review at the hearing, and then on May 3rd, the economic opportunity analysis will go to council. This is another slide that kind of helps identify this related to the comprehensive plan. Moving forward between now, January through June 2023, on the comprehensive plan side of things, we will be having background reports prepared for the comprehensive plan. There'll be a 20-year vision process that will be started in this process. Moving into next fiscal year, there'll be growth scenarios that will be reviewed as part of the comprehensive plan update. There'll be urban growth boundary analysis, and goals and policies will be developed. And then the following fiscal year through December 2024 will be the comprehensive plan, the draft of that and final with an urban growth boundary expansion anticipated. So in terms of the land area, we haven't really talked in detail about land area. And again, this is all going to have to be analyzed, and I'm just giving you a forecast of what is coming. But it's not going to start with immediately with, we have the background reports, and those will get into things like level of service for transportation, utilities, those kinds of issues will be addressed, and policies related to those. But moving forward into the scenario planning in next fiscal year, 23-24, we will start to look at, land needs that are beyond the current city boundaries. The areas in white are not urban reserve. They're undesignated, and they are available, at least conceptually available, for expansion into those areas. And I'll go into the acreages in a moment here about what the deficiency is currently from the buildable lands analysis. This information here came from our consultants. These are preliminary numbers. So what is that area in white in the former map? What does that convert into acreage-wise? And there is considerable acreage that's around the edges of the city, and that's part of this discussion. We'll be dealing with those areas that would potentially need to be expanded into, as well as how much land there actually is in those areas. Excuse me. So potential efficiency measures that are part of this analysis process. In order to do an urban growth boundary expansion, there has to be efficiency measures. The Department of Land Conservation and Development requires those. Efficiency measures are ways to implement code that actually allows better use of residentially zoned property in ways that would be incentive-based, like plan unit development updates, creation of cottage development ordinance, which would apply likely to properties that have not come into the city yet, that could be defined and allowing a different variety of housing types that our current zoning ordinance simply does not. There could be a mix of smaller lots around open space. That's what cottage development ordinance are. Plan unit development ordinances sometimes have a mix of product type. They sometimes have single family and then attached product, which would be townhomes. That's another piece. These ordinances have not really been advanced, but these concepts are items that we believe would be important to consider as part of efficiency measures. The other one would be creation of a mixed-use zone along 99E for commercial zones on the south side of 99. Currently, the commercial zones along south of 99 do not allow for residential. So you could have commercial on the ground floor and residential above, for example. Some of that could be redevelopment, some of that could be existing. And so this all, again, has to be, as part of this process, to get to an urban growth boundary expansion process, there have to be efficiency measures adopted before the urban growth boundary expansion is initiated. So these are kind of some variety of housing types. These are not, all of the variety of housing types, but just kind of gives a smattering of different product types that we see as residential. There are many other types as well. These are the strategy categories at Department of Land Conservation and Development on the housing policy, on the housing production strategy part of this. These are the categories that the Department of Land Conservation and Development, these categories are ones that they have a kind of a list of items that are used for jurisdictions to choose from, or the jurisdictions can come up with their own. So the housing production strategy will address many strategies that could end up becoming development code later. Those differ from efficiency measures, housing efficiency measures, which would end up becoming code before the comp plan was adopted. So the housing production strategies that the Housing Advisory Committee has come up with today, to date, include a list here, and these include all these items: develop criteria and process for identifying land upzone for middle housing, revised development code to allow duplexes in lower density zones, allow cottage developments in low density zones, streamline permitting for plan unit developments, encourage development and plan unit developments, modify system development charges to reflect home size, periodically update the housing needs analysis, conduct periodic review of potential barriers to new development, conduct land use permitting educational workshops, and amend commercial zoning to allow mixed use housing. So this is the part where I was hoping to have just introduce this topic tonight without diving into it in great length, but I was hoping to use the Planning Commission as the vetting tool for the potential efficiency measures, which we would like to include as plan unit development code updates, creation of cottage development ordinance, and creation of mixed use zone along 99E commercial zones. So these are the three items. And these would be in work sessions. This would not be additive to your current hearing items. We would mix them in with other things. So this is not committing you guys and gals to, a bunch of extra meetings, but I was hoping that we could take that information. I think the Planning Commission brings a lot of strength in terms of understanding of these items, and I think it would be a good vetting process. So I just wanted to maybe stop there and take a pause, and maybe this would be a good time to see if there's questions, and I have some more to present as well on the employment side, but maybe we take a pause here.
Okay. We'll just kind of go around the room. Commissioner Jarosh, do you have any questions, comments at this point?
This all sounds great. I guess I'd be curious, a lot of what we saw in the previous two slides were in the survey. So I'd just be curious if maybe something that comes out of the survey results might change this priority a little bit. But this looks fine to me. Thank you.
Great comment, Commissioner Jarosh. Yeah.
Okay, Commissioner Llewellyn.
Yeah, this all looks good. It brings a lot of questions, but I think as we dive into this more, there'll be a better time for some questions. But one of the things that's on the council's meeting this Wednesday is talking about a hotel. Is there something in here along that lines? I'm just trying to get caught up on some of this.
Yeah, absolutely, Commissioner Llewellyn. What I understand because I actually received some information. Is this in Clackamas County that you're speaking of?
They're talking about something here in Canby.
Okay, they are. I'm unaware of that. I know there is one planned in Clackamas County. It's actually going to hearing.
Maybe I read that wrong.
Yeah, no worries. It might actually be here too. I had not heard that. That's something the county, as I understand, is looking at as transitionary housing. I don't really know the full details of that. That's not one of the items that we've put forward as a measure, but that could be considered if that was something the council so desired to do.
Was that something, so the planning commissions, we go through all this and we come with our thoughts? Because I think there's some real opportunities to have both a hotel and a convention center here. Is this something we get into during this? Tell me if I'm out of line anytime here.
No, this is all good. I think that I guess the question is, more of a typical hotel is something that probably is outside of maybe what we're going to be dealing with. The one in Clackamas County was really more of a conversion of a hotel to housing, which is a different thing. That's going to fit more within the Planning Commission's purview. But I know there is a desire here for a hotel for, you know, various activities and hopefully combining those with other things in the future, maybe sports activities, those kinds of things. And that really is more in the wheelhouse of the city council versus if it's related to housing affordability, that would probably be more us than it is if it's a hotel that's for standard commercial use.
I just hate to see that. I don't know if we have any input, but it's been talked about putting that in the industrial park, and I just hate to see that. But the other thing I had is mixed use south of 99E. Where exactly, is that all of the south side of 99E?
It's to be determined, and I think part of this is it's difficult to understand what this would look like, I think, with the current lens right now, but I think we need to look at this within the context of 20-year horizon that the comprehensive plan is going to have. So things that don't exist there could exist there, and the Planning Commission, I would be proposing to help sort through that and define where would that be appropriate with staff's input. I mean, we obviously would come forward with more information on giving you very macro direction here tonight, and the intention was not to dive real deep into this. We very well may also use our consulting services, consultants to help us with this process as well.
Okay, that's all I have right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
If I could interrupt, I just looked at the agenda for the council meeting, and it did say discussion of Canby Hotel Development Analysis.
And Commissioner Jarosz, that is related to, I believe, commercial, a standard commercial hotel.
Okay.
Yeah, that's different. A great question, though. But there's just a lot of things moving right now but I think that's related to like this kind of recreational, attracting people, everything from the fairgrounds, people that may not stay here and they're in Wilsonville or Oregon City because there's no hotel here or one that they would want to stay in, those kinds of things. That's really the part of that discussion.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Vice Chair Ewert.
There you go. I'm trying to unmute myself. So I have a couple of questions. Number one, talking about this screen that we're looking at right here, it says the creation of mixed-use zone along 99E corridor for commercial zones. And is that, Don, where you're talking about the commercial below and residential above?
Yeah, that would be the concept of that. And right now, that's not currently allowed. You can do that on the north side in the downtown, but you cannot do that on the south side.
Okay, so I guess then that's a question that I want to explore just a little bit. So we did actually delve into this a number of years ago on the north side, and we approved the Pacific Northwest Plaza and the Douglas Professional Plaza that are both in the downtown area. And I'm kind of curious. I don't know. I know that on the Pacific Northwest Plaza, on their sign down below, there are some businesses that are advertised there. But the Douglas, in all the years after we've approved that, I've never really seen businesses in those, and they actually look more like living units than they do business units. They're different than like what the Dahlia has down below and residential up above. So I'm kind of curious as to, are we looking at developing something new and different, or just carrying it over to being developed on the other side?
I would say more than new and different, and I know what you're saying. I think there's challenges with these zoning districts because we're trying to incentivize basically more affordable housing to the extent that can be done, and not at the same time not lose commercial viability. So there's this balance between those two, and I think going to take a very creative zone and criteria to do that. I've seen some really bad examples in my career about mixed-use zones. They don't always work. They don't always achieve what is envisioned. So I think part of this, on all three of these, I think what I'd like to do is propose, like, what is the purpose? What's the purpose and need of these, and what are we targeting? And that would be my hope, is we could start to zero in on that. What is that market segment that we're targeting in on? And hoping that that is something that we could use then as a baseline to help this, which is a little less, well, if we were able to focus in on that specific element, I think it would help with direction on what this should look like more so. And I know it's a kind of a vague answer to your question, but I think it is going to require some definite analysis and sensitivity to trying to achieve something that actually works and that would provide that. And I would say it could take the form of an overlay, so the base zone stays the same. So, I mean, it's not necessarily a zone, it could be an overlay. The idea is giving people the opportunity, giving developers the opportunity and owners to have a variety of different options which they may take advantage of. And that would also help the city by providing housing that is more reasonably affordable.
Okay, well, and I get that. I guess my point is, I think that we've got two examples of where you're trying to go with this. One is the Dahlia, which is, in my opinion, kind of what we're shooting for. The not so one, that the ones that didn't work so well are the Douglas Professional Plaza and the Pacific Northwest Plaza. Those did not turn out, at least in my mind, as to what we were shooting for. So anyway.
Great.
So that being said, I'm on board with that. I don't have a problem with that. The other thing, on the screen where you had items A through J on the housing production strategy evaluation, you referenced that there was is there a committee that's on this, and who is this committee?
There's a housing advisory committee, and that committee has met 3 times. They're going to meet again next week, February 22nd. It's a variety of stakeholders, from property owners to folks in the community. It's a broad spectrum of people. I don't have the complete list in front of me, but it also has city council members and planning commission staff or former planning commission staff on there. Jason Padden was on there, for example. So it's a variety of folks. I could send that to you, the list offline, Commissioner Ewert, if you'd like to see the exact list. And you're welcome to attend. You're welcome to attend the meetings. These are public meetings as well.
And that happens February 22nd.
February 22nd. It'll be 6 p.m. It'll be upstairs in the Mount Hood room.
I'd be interested in all that too, Don.
Okay, yeah, no, that's great. No, you're welcome to attend. These are open public meetings. So,
When did that committee get put together?
it was put together about 6 months ago.
And are you guys the ones that did it, or was it the council? Or?
It was a combination of us as staff, and we included council members with that as well.
Okay, so you're going to send the meeting place and time and all that?
Yeah, I can send that out to the whole planning commission.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so then, yeah, I mean, there's these things that the A through J things are, I mean, there's some pretty significant things there that we're talking about. And I have to say, I kind of feel like I've been a little bit left in the dust as far as this is concerned. But yeah, can you move forward back again to your last screen there, Don?
Yeah, just a sec here. And Commissioner Ewert, just for context, so the housing production strategy, those are items we have been discussing, and those again are strategies just strategies. Those may or may not end up becoming items that move forward into code. Whereas these efficiency measures that we're dealing with, that we're looking at, are ones that we are suggesting as staff get moved into code. And that's at least to address the urban growth boundary expansion issue.
Okay, so when you talk about the creation of cottage development ordinance, basically what you're talking about there, if I'm hearing things right, is you're talking about decreasing lot size and increasing the footprint of the building allowed on the lot. Am I getting that right, or am I off on that?
There's several ways of doing that. Typically, you're looking at probably a smaller lot with a smaller home on it, not tiny homes, surrounded by open space and like trail network systems or some open space amenity. So this is kind of a newer concept. There are other cities that have done this. And part of that would be bringing forward those examples to talk about those. And it's, again, these are fee ownership. It's not a condominium, but it has that aspect to it in the sense that there's commonalities of open space. Typically, these all face each other, and there's a common open area that these face. There have been some developers in the community that have expressed interest in this as well. They've not given us detail of what this looks like, what they would suggest it looks like, but they have indicated that's something that they're seeing a market for.
Okay, so I guess I would ask the question on that, and just to talk about that just a little bit, because I hear the word cottage development brought up all the time. So, yeah, I see your picture there.
Yep.
So I guess my question is that when a developer develops something like this, he builds it, the place is smaller. What drives the fact that this is affordable housing? I'll use an example. Not too far from where I live, there was some open lots and some houses that were taken down, and there was some fourplex buildings put up there, and those are individually owned units. And I would imagine that they would kind of fit into a little bit of the cottage thing, except for it's more of a fourplex type of a situation. But I guess my question is in any of these houses, when we're trying to talk about affordable housing, let's say somebody builds it and they sell it for, just pick a number, say $250,000. And the person lives in it, is there for a year, and then it goes up to, let's pick another number, 400,000. And all of a sudden it becomes not affordable living anymore. And so I guess my question is, as we build these things, I look at the Honda pits down here by the post office, the houses that are down in the low area. Those were small units, they were small houses, but they're selling for $350,000, $450,000. What keeps this into affordable housing? How does this, we develop this, that's great, but what's the incentive for these people to not try to get the maximum dollar out of these things, and they all of a sudden become not really affordable housing anymore?
And I think all great points. A couple comments. One is these are probably more affordable versus affordable to some degree, and this is a matter of degree here. Absolutely, on a spectrum, we would love to see the ability for prices to dramatically decrease and for things to suddenly become affordable. I think you're raising a really good point, and that is, again, back to defining the purpose and need of what we're trying to do with these efficiency measures, which is what is that target area, and working through that with other codes and talking to developers about what that means to them. I would say there is a place for more affordable housing in this community as well as affordable housing. So it's really a matter of what are we trying to do to create that opportunity that can actually do either of those? And I think it is a challenge. I think there are some jurisdictions, I was reading some stuff about cottage clusters in Bend, and just as a little research here, not diving real deep, and part of that was the developer was saying he thought initially that this could be less expensive. And that, to your point, you're exactly right. So I think part of this is even a $350,000 home, though, is way better than a $600,000 home. So that does solve some of the demand that's identified in the housing needs analysis and housing production strategy that's been quantified. Still fulfills a segment of that because there is a significant amount of need still with single-family homes. That is actually the predominance of what is forecasted based on the last 12 years and looking at that 12 years and then moving that forward into the future. And so just again, kind of, we touched on some of this before, and this is good that we're having a conversation, but just to repeat some information that we've had before that I've presented, and kind of a broken record here, but the City of Canby needs, and this is roughly about 2,300 additional dwelling units over the next 20 years. And forecasted of that is 1,416 are single-family detached homes, 327 are townhomes and plexes, 362 are multifamily, 158 manufactured housing or cottages, 23 group quarters. And this again is from looking at past tense, like looking the last 12 years and then forecasting that same growth into the future. So there is a place for more affordable housing to meet these. And I would say we do strive to try to create as much affordable as we can, but I think there's a little bit of a misnomer on like the idea that we can get to exact affordability, but can we do better? Absolutely.
I guess just to play on what Dan was saying, when we have new affordable housing, I just fear we're going to get, if you've seen what Newburgh has done out there in the new Parkway, that's the kind of stuff that ruined your town. I just hate to see that. I'm with Dan on this. I think we need to really zero in on that. And what exactly are we talking about here?
Well, and I think part of that is for the Planning Commission to, there's a couple things here. One is we have a need in this community. We know there's a need. We know there's about 6,000 people that will be here in another 20 years based on the forecasts. And what we're dealing with here is, not providing any incentives at all here. The demographic of this community will be substantially different in 20 years than it is now. Will you have school children here in 20 years if there is not a change to try to strive to make things more affordable? That is part of the dynamic here and part of the discussion and part of what the council will have to deal with. The other part is, which I would really like the Planning Commission to dive into, is showing pictures and graphics of things that you all find attractive. How do we then codify that and make that into our code? So design standards are part of this process as well. You obviously saw something you didn't like in Newburgh. I get that. It's not one size fits all here, but I think we need to have, there's no reason, in my opinion, that we cannot have a mix of housing types in the community that are still compatible with other housing types. It's been done elsewhere. So, just to that point, I'm just defending that a little bit, but there's a need here. We know what the need is. And part of that is then trying to define that within the parameters of design and code.
Yeah, it just seems like every time we talk about affordable housing as we move forward, it's just the lots get narrow and narrow and the houses go up more and more. It's like, and they keep going up in price.
And I agree. I think some of this is perhaps the tools that we have now in our code may not be the best example. So when you drive by something like, I hate that, what could we do better? What could we have done better in our code to make that, and it may not be, what has happened 30 years ago, that template that most of us in this room have experienced, that template is probably not the template in the future. Really, I mean, the prices in this kind of escalating market are such that families simply aren't going to be able to afford a house in this community, which means there are not going to be any kids here. So, I mean, that's really what this comes down to. So how do we make it so it matches up and it's still not a nice product, still reflective of the fact that it's high quality, but it may look different. And I know that's challenging. I mean, it's not to say that it needs to be, it may not be for everybody, but that is the market, and those are selling.
So can I get Commissioner Hutchinson to
Yeah, please.
have an opportunity, and then maybe we can open it back up
Yep,
for
yep.
some additional comments? Commissioner Hutchinson?
Sure, can we go back to the
Yeah.
slide?
Which one would you like to go to, Michael?
Well, the one where you were.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Yeah, where you're actually looking for our input.
Sorry, I went off on a little bit of deep dive there, so bring us back. Okay.
I understand completely. There's a lot going on. So for me, I got to see some planned unit developments, I think. I just kind of traipsed through them accidentally, and then when I sat down and looked around, kind of realized where I was. And one of the things are they're pretty big. And so I'm kind of interested to know how small you could make a planned unit development and still call it that. Which, I don't want to be restrictive about it at all, because I liked the places where I was, and I kind of went there for reasons completely unrelated to the housing that was there. It just happened to be there, and I was like, oh, that would be nice. And so I'm just kind of interested to know, because it's like, I think that there's some chunks of land where, that sort of thing would be possible if there was an ambitious developer that wanted to do it. And I think, with the parks and the rivers and the golf courses, I think that there's a market for it. It'd be interesting to see how small you could get one of those. The cottage development ordinance, similarly, I'm kind of interested to know how large those get. I'm just trying to think of things in terms of multiples of the lot that my house is on, which is a little shy of, I don't know, it's like a fifth of an acre or something like that. And, I've got this big old sprawly single level ranch, and, if you could stick 3 or 4 of these lots together, you could have a pretty nice common area, or essentially you'd be putting cottages around a park, which there are a lot of people that, younger people that I've talked to that really like the idea of, paying taxes and having a park, as opposed to having a garage full of lawn care implements and maintaining their own personal park in their backyard. And it's something that I've heard, more commonly as time goes by, and I think it's just a reflection of, how people spend their time. So, as far as the creation of the mixed-use zone, I don't know, I was kind of looking at the map here, and so you're essentially talking about C2, kind of, when you're talking about raw zoning, but then I heard you just talk about an overlay. And I think that might be something a little bit more practical. Just because when I'm looking at the map here, there's a little spot of C2 where the road bends right by Lee Elementary, but then it pretty much ends. But I would kind of expect that with the traffic that headed out that way, that, there might be some commercial development out on the edges, to some degree. And that might be a really nice place for the overlay where someone, could put in a convenience store with a living unit over the top or something of that nature. Or maybe have a cluster of buildings or a large unit that has a couple of these kind of units in it. That could, set up an ice cream store for the kids or something out that way. And it might be a way to kind of soften, the introduction of a commercial corridor in a place in town where there's really not any at this point. I think I mentioned this before, but the nice thing about it is that commercial zones a lot of times won't have a lot of foot traffic at night. And it's nice to have a little bit of residential mix around them, just so that you have more eyes around the neighborhood. And it's, for law enforcement and that sort of thing. I think it's a positive. But that was my input on those things. And as far as the rest of the items were concerned, it's really important that we remind ourselves that we're trying to achieve a community that's reflective of what the community has been in the past. And, you know, we got to stop thinking and getting our minds locked into the term of low-income housing and thinking in terms of young family housing. Because I'm telling you, when my family started out, I was one low-income dude working for the school district. And, you know, I needed that. And so I think the terminology is that when we start talking about things in terms of low-income housing, we're not thinking about our kids. You know, we're thinking about somebody else that we're accommodating. And oh my gosh, you know how those people are, whoever they might be. And it's us, it's our families, and we want our families to be able to live in the community in which we live, if we can. But that's not the reality for people who graduate from high school and then graduate from college, and they'd like to come back here. But they have to go somewhere else to get their start, and then maybe at some point in the future they can hope to buy a place here. And being someone who worked in the schools for over 20 years, it's kind of weird seeing a community grow and then seeing the student population remain flat and then start to decline. And these are real numbers. I mean, this affects the school services, it affects the mix of the community, and it affects, you know, how we live our lives and what we expect to see when we walk down the street. And so, you know, I caution everyone to avoid getting caught up on labels and try and remember what the problem and the product are, and to try and focus on that as best we can.
Thank you, Commissioner Hutchinson. Just a few comments in response, and I won't go too deep because this is for other work sessions in the future. Really good questions on the size and the scale of planned unit developments and cottage developments. I think part of that is I was hoping the Planning Commission, as part of this exercise, we could start to develop criteria. And criteria meaning two things. One is criteria for where these should be applicable. You know, should they be near more major streets? And this, you know, there's kind of these layers here. But, you know, there may be an acreage, which is what you're getting to. There may be an acreage definition for these, but there's also probably going to be other criteria, and some of that really is, I mean, we're looking at more green space that's not developed now in the city. That green space likely is probably in the urban growth boundary now. It's not in the city, but it's in the current urban growth boundary, or it could be in the future urban growth boundary area. So those are other pieces of this that need to kind of be thought about in broad brush. I think I would like to suggest, you know, samples and examples. There is some interchange on planned unit developments and cottage developments. Some of the elements have commonalities between those two. You're right, though. Planned unit developments, when you think of those, you think of golf courses and you think of like large open space, and you got a mix of uses. You have condos, you've got, you know, large lots around a golf course, for example.
Or a lake.
Or a lake. And that, you know, that's, and planning and developments have been around for a long, long time. That word has been around a long time in this country. So those are larger scale planned communities. That's kind of what that comes into, where I kind of see cottage developments could be more smaller chunks of land, but still, in my mind, probably where that would be most applicable would not be like, you know, in areas that it wouldn't necessarily be so much infill. It would be like larger chunks of land that haven't developed yet. I mean, that's the only way I think it's going to really work.
Well, and these decisions that we make regarding these will affect where they can go.
Exactly.
And,
yeah.
you know, and
yeah.
I wasn't necessarily looking for answers for any of these things.
Yep.
I think these are these are things that, you know, we need to pay attention to. And like I said, it's like the planned unit developments. Both of the ones I went there because there was a restaurant, and just happened to be surrounded by a nice community. Excuse me. And so now that I kind of have an idea of what they look like, that I'm paying attention, I'm thinking that I can kind of come up with some ideas of what they were and look at how big they were and how they fit in.
And I think part of that is, there's common thematic elements and what part of the amenity that were we really looking for as a city, and then also kind of what latitude are we willing to give in that process as well, which would mean in exchange for like the open space and the common amenities for that, would there be a mix of different types of housing, that would be there as part of that? Again, to be determined, but again, we don't control the market. That's not what the city does, but we do have the ability to provide incentives to create different dynamics and different mixes of housing. And that's part of this process of, again, to your point, trying to achieve the community that, going forward, thinking of young families, et cetera. I think that's a really good way to look at it.
So I just want to key in on something Commissioner Llewellyn mentioned. Commissioner Llewellyn, you were referencing in Newburgh. Are you talking about where that bypass is around Winooski and just past where the old paper plant was, off to the, would that be the north side of that bypass? There are those 2-level houses. They're super narrow, and they're just kind of like one stacked on top of each other. Very, very minimalistic lots. Is that the development you're thinking about?
It is. It is. Yeah. That's just horrible. I can't believe they're doing that.
I agree. I was just thinking about in where I used to live in Beaverton, they did a cottage community, and I don't know if we could ever maybe bring it up on like Google Maps or Earth and zoom in on the neighborhood. It's basically 173rd and Walker Road. Most of these, and the ones that I've seen, and I'm sure there's a ton that I haven't seen, and the styles may have changed over the decades, but these were anywhere from like on the low end, not the low end, but the smaller end, like 1,400 square foot. On the higher or the more square footage side, maybe like 1,600 or 1,700 square feet ish. And it was like I'm talking like it had a patio off the back, and very tiny little footprint. I mean, basically a little square of turf out the front, but it had kind of a public area that was kind of like all the units, like Don referenced, were facing each other. They were single level. They were not two level, and the appearance was like, oh, this is a cute little neighborhood, how quaint, but I don't know how livable they are. And so I guess I'm kind of like everybody else, like, what does it look like? What do floor plans look like? How do they lay out? Can a young family, for example, is there room for a kid, and is this just a catapult for them once they get in to get some equity built up in order to grow into that next step? Because I can tell you that at least with the interest rates doing what they did, and the markets are weird, so it's not forever, but at least for right now, the mid-20 somethings, young couples, I think just flat got priced out. There is no such thing for them at the 450 and up mark, because that interest payment, what the payment is on that on a mortgage is just like so out of reach for those guys. But can a cottage market accommodate a 350 and up? I'd be interested to see what contractors were thinking in terms of pricing and quality and style. But again, it like you say, it has to be a mix. Like there has to be an upward trajectory for people to sell that home, and as their family grows and move into the next home.
And I think largely it is up to the city. I mean, this is not a dictate by the state, but it is up to the city on, the spectrum, the needle between affordable and more affordable, and criteria that relates to those about livability, et cetera, which again, we have a pretty big say in that as a city. I think one thing is just observationally, we need to do something to make things more affordable, period. That's not something that really is something that's in debate, I don't believe. But then the question is, how does it look like something that, and the litmus test may not be what we would buy.
Right.
The litmus test, to your point, is and I would love to see that more like, what is the price point?
Yep.
And what do you get? And then what is the exchange? And then how does that work in relationship to how that fits into Canby? But again, going down that path to try to define how you can get there in something that I think is attractive. I think quality of design is really important. I think, this may not really be like, the lots might be smaller, but they still are single family. And again, what is the amenity? What would the expectation of the amenity be? How big would the amenity have to be? Those are the kinds of things. But you're right about currently with the interest rates, it's a killer right now. It's just, yeah.
But also then setting kind of the expectations for ourselves, like as a planning commission, as a city council, you can put the intent there, but what people actually do, you can't control that. And I also find myself fighting to stay in our lane a little bit, because I too want to see, a convention center, a hotel, a robust business community, a good mix. But there's kind of like this chicken and egg thing, like where in the hell do you start? There's so many different things to consider. You got the zoning and then the mixed zoning and the overlay and all the different facets of that. It's like, how do you recommend just methodically moving through this process so we don't get distracted by too many shiny objects and just accomplish our mission?
And I think part of it is, just to even contemplate an urban growth boundary expansion, it's super, super challenging to even do that at all, even though there's a demand. And we know the demand based on the buildable lands assessment. But I think these seem, and again, they may not seem to you guys, but these are more low-hanging fruit to planning staff than some of the other ones that were keyed out. Like, these seem pretty intense. Well, those ones that are more intense are going to be part of the comp plan discussion, and like, what are the policies that come out of that? And that will formulate direction for the rest of the housing production strategies. Ultimately, council will have to weigh in on all of that. These are just some ways of at least lowering the price bar, hopefully to some degree. Doesn't solve everything, and this is kind of part of that though, but just as a step forward, really is kind of what this is, to show Department of Land Conservation and Development, yeah, we have done this. And even with these provisions, which we know, even with these provisions, there will still be a need for more land for 20 years of growth.
And again, just to stress, there's going to be opportunity to have these sessions with city council, because I recognize that there's some stuff that is directly in our purview, and there's other stuff that it'd be nice if we said something so they had something to hear from us on. But I think it'd be,
I think it'd be great. I think you guys are really more on the ground, so to speak, than the council is, and I think that's important when we're looking at ordinance stuff. But I also feel like that creates a strong base. Absolutely, yeah. There should be many joint sessions, and I'm talking about this now because like the time seems like it's enormously out there, but it really isn't. So we're probably talking about sometime late next summer that this would need to be adopted.
Well, there's
that seems like a way down the path, but it took 9 months to get the food garden ordinance through this process. That was thought to have been much shorter in staff's minds. Okay.
Well, and that's what I'm hoping, is that if council and planning can get together and power through some of these issues, to include not just the residential, but also the commercial and the attractions and things that help to build and people want to move here. If we're going to put all this effort into the resi side or the residential market, I hate to see an opportunity missed with the commercial side and kind of building those two in unison.
I think those are critical, and I'm going to dive, I don't want to spend all the time on housing because I haven't got to the employment side yet.
Okay.
But, so we're not here all night, but I wanted to, maybe if there's other folks that have final comments, because I'm about ready to kind of transition.
All right. Commissioner Jarosh, any final comments?
Not for me, thanks.
Commissioner Llewellyn?
Don, you said, so as we go through all this, you're going to develop visuals, right? You'll have these guys develop visuals for us to see what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think that seems, and again, I need to set this all up, but I think that's appropriate. I think
Yeah, that'd be really helpful.
it feels to me like a lot of this, and again, visual preference, because I think you kind of know we all kind of know what we like and when we see it. I mean, I think that's part of this process. The challenge is even within those, there's many different examples. And so I do think that's important, the visuals, and then what kind of design standards did that come with? That would be a comparison. And then what does that look like here in Canby? I mean, how would that play out?
I guess in my mind, looking at some of these other developments, I want to be really careful that in the decision we make today doesn't devalue Canby 30 years from now.
I think it's a really valid point, and I'm not trying to diminish that at all. I think the design piece is really critical.
That's all I got.
Okay, Vice Chair Ewert.
Okay, in looking at this list that's right here in front of us, the planned unit development code updates. Dawn, in a nutshell, can you tell us what you would like to see as a planning staff changed in the planned unit development code updates?
In a nutshell, I think a great question, and I would say that providing for a variety of different housing types around common open space. So that would mean, in my visual, there could be townhomes across the street from single-family detached homes. There could be large lots and smaller lots detached in that planned unit development. There could be a variety of things. There might be triplexes, there may be duplexes. Well, they're not really duplexes, they're more like townhouses, but there's a variety of product that could be mixed in together. They would all share the commonality of whatever the amenity is. And that's really what the current code doesn't really get us there. And that's it. And I think part of this, again, goes back to what Commissioner Llewellyn was saying is, the visuals of this. And I can see some visuals of my own mind that fit, in my personal opinion, fit in really well. And I've seen some that don't fit in well with different communities. But I think that would be my visual of like having something that is not just straight up, yeah, you get to do density average, you get to do density averaging within the current zone. This would be more like you're gonna be able to do higher density, but it's gonna be mixed with smaller lots, larger lots, and like townhomes. That would be my visual.
Okay, so out of the 2,300 home or spaces that we need to come up with, what you're saying is you would like to set aside some area that we would have this mix of single-family residential, cottage homes, townhouses, that type of thing. It would just be kind of a mix of things, and there would be some open area and whatnot.
Exactly. And there's of the list that we have, and instead of what we've traditionally seen is these are very, very exclusionary designations. You got apartments, and then you have single family lots. I'm not really suggesting apartments in the mix there, but I think we've had very exclusionary boundaries, and I think they can be inclusionary in some ways with a mix that still works, that I believe could still be visually attractive and still, match up with, the quality that was talked about for 30 years from now.
Okay, well, I guess that, excuse me, I just come out and say I don't have a problem with that, setting aside some area to do that. I'm not really sure that is the, I don't know sure if that's really what the citizenry of Canby wants, but, or the direction they want us to go to, but we've done this in, like down in the Honda pits, we've got very small houses there. We've got duplexes, we've got single families. There might even be some threeplexes down there that are kind of mixed. It's a nice little community. People keep their places up. But again, I want to go back to, excuse me, the fact that those are bumping up into the $400,000 range, and they're pretty small places. So I don't have a problem with that. We've also got the state of Oregon has already mandated us to allow duplexes into our residential areas. So we've got that mix already going on. So I don't have a problem with setting aside an area. I don't think that we want to make it a blanket in all of the land that we open up for development, that somebody is able to come in anywhere they want and do this kind of thing. But if we want to set aside some areas to do this, I would love to see more families with kids move into town, but just like Canby High School said when they did their addition on, they said that they're flatlined for the next 10 years, and so they're not expecting any families to be moving in, and we're going to kind of skew their charts a little bit if we make a move to all of a sudden start bringing it in. But I'm all for families, and I think families need to have affordable living, and I don't have a problem with looking at that. But specific areas, I don't have a problem with that. So when you say planned unit development code updates, you want to update what we already have and expand it, or do you want to make a new thing?
It's to be determined. I would say we could maybe, there might be some value in leaving the current PUD ordinance that we have. I'm not sure if we need to evaluate that. It could be either of those. I think we need something that goes beyond what we currently have, though, to provide incentives that would get more towards the more affordable housing.
Okay, I'm. If you think that we can create that and do that, I'm willing to give it an attempt. But I also will go along with what Commissioner Llewellyn was saying. That thing that they're doing there along the bypass in Newburgh, and I got a feeling that whole plant that was there that they tore down is going to go the same way. Those shotgun houses are, in my opinion, my humble opinion, are not what we're looking for Canby. That is, I don't even want to go there. I don't even know why we would want to waste any of our valuable land in putting something like that in. But when I go online and I put in cottage house developments, there's some real cutesy little developments that people do, and they're really nice. I can't believe that those are affordable housing, but maybe they are. And so I'm all for that, but I don't want to go down the shotgun house row that Newburgh did with that development. That's not something I want to see us allow. The duplexes and fourplexes that we've allowed infill downtown I question those just a little bit. But anyway, I'm looking at what the list that you've got here. I don't have any problem with moving forward and trying to figure out what we need to do there.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Commissioner Hutchinson, last call.
I'm good, thanks.
Very good.
So I'm going to go ahead and move into the next
Yep.
section. Now, try not to spend quite as much time on this. So economic opportunity analysis, moving into that. Again, there's an economic opportunity advisory committee similar to a housing advisory committee. Again, a cross-section of people, and there's business organizations like Clackamas County was involved, and employee agencies were involved with the advisory committee. In the discussion here, there's three scenarios that were looked at, which is low growth, which is less growth than the cities historically have had, medium growth, which is what the city historically has had, and high growth, which is higher than what the city has historically had. The advisory committee endorsed the medium growth scenario that's been discussed with the Planning Commission and also City Council. There's general support around that to continue with that growth scenario. What does this all mean? So kind of in a nutshell, looking at 20-year supply, and there's been a huge absorption of especially industrial land. Not surprising, since the urban growth boundary expansion, or urban growth area rather, for Canby, I believe dates back to 1984. So not surprising that we're in a pretty significant need. And the industrial park wasn't around in '84, but since the industrial park was built, a large portion of that is either committed or has been built. So moving forward, kind of in the medium scenario on the right on the table, you see 457 acres for industrial employment that would be forecasted. These are net numbers, and about 8 acres of commercial. And that would be, again, within the areas that I showed in white. Somewhere around those would be, likely around the industrial park now, but it would be in areas that were not in reserve. So the community development kind of aspirations, there was a kind of visioning process in 2013, and just to kind of go back and look at what was said back then and compare that to now. Some key themes back then were to maintain quality of life of residents, quality job creation, improve overall tax base, vital and active downtown, Highway 99 corridor treatment, well-designed range of housing types, neighborhood safety and livability, and improved pedestrian connections. The Economic Advisory Committee came up with objectives themselves and their work, and they came up with these: enhance Canby's positive business environment with adequate commercial, industrial, and mixed-use sites to address future growth opportunities. Plan for industrial expansion areas east and north of Milano Road. Retain and attract businesses that provide quality jobs and high levels of employment per acre. Provide incentives for targeted job creation and major private investment. Support expansion in health services. Support workforce training and development. Expand opportunities for development of workforce housing. Expand lodging opportunities. Lodging options, fund roads and infrastructure using innovative techniques, support art and visitation, including agri and bicycle tourism, attract downtown redevelopment with integrated mixed-use buildings, update design standards and provide incentives for building renovations, think globally / regional, and act locally with respect to community development. So those are the objectives they came up with. And so kind of the two things that are, and this is a little less complicated perhaps than the housing, really it kind of comes down to City Council's future direction, and this will be coming forth to the Planning Commission on March 27th for the Economic Opportunity Assessment. You'll get an entire document, but the gist of this, kind of boiling it all down, comes down to the growth scenarios and Planning Commission's recommendation of those, and then also getting into concurrence or recommendations for the economic development objectives or alterations to those. So this is kind of the economic side of things. Again, looking at 20 years, again, looking at the growth over the last 11 to 12 years for employment, forecasting those forward really results in the medium growth scenario moving forward. It is a big chunk of land, but it is a 20-year supply. And so with that, I'll stop talking and turn it back over to Chair Ellison.
Thank you, Director Hardy. I believe that we move into items of interest.
Did you want to have a brief discussion, Chair Ellison?
Sorry.
Yeah. I know it's been a long night.
Yeah.
Sorry, it took a little bit, yeah.
Commissioner Jarosh, any discussion items off of what was just presented?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see as much discussion around this as we've had at housing, and there's probably some suggestions and opportunities for how to do that with this group. However, for me, this is just my corporate background, I saw the aspirations, and I see that's kind of a recurring theme, and those are great. But maybe it happens and I don't see it, but did we ever stop as a city and reflect on those and say, hey, how'd we do? And if we didn't do, why not? And how do we do different? Instead, what I seem to see are the same aspirations and they may not be coming always from the city, or they may be coming from consultants, but if we don't reflect on why something didn't happen from a former aspiration, how do we do better or do differently? Just do differently. And there's so many aspects to that, but it feels like motherhood and apple pie every 5 years. Let's do motherhood and apple pie. Well, let's do motherhood and apple pie. That's just what it feels like to me anyway. So I'd be curious if there's anything around that we have aspirations again, and how are they different, and how can we attack them differently to make them happen?
And great points. I think that some of these are kind of living in the sense that that you shoot for them. What you're asking for is the fulfillment of those to some degree. That when I think some of them are in motion, but some of them, when you go back even to to 2013,
right?
It's kind of interesting.
How'd we do?
Yeah,
well,
and it's like a scorecard. I think some of these are perhaps measured over, again, a 10 to 20 year period, I would say, at a minimum.
Absolutely.
And so, but you're raising a good point. Actually, that's something that that is measured a little bit more so on the housing side, because the state really wants that scorecard more so than they do on the employment. But they ask that question, and there are some check-ins that we'll have to do periodically with the state, which will be within, I believe, 6 to 8 year periods from the time of adoption of the housing production strategy, housing need analysis. They want a scorecard of those items. And so that will happen over time. I think that some of these, I think what you're raising is important, because I think what happens is there's a visioning, and then if a visioning doesn't happen for another 10 years, it's hard to remember what you did 10 years ago. So I think the way to do this maybe would be to have some check-ins about these periodically, to say, here's what we're adopting, and how do we score these going forward?
Right, thanks.
Okay, Commissioner Hutchinson, any comments on the economic?
Well, I think middle ground is probably what we're barreling towards. As far as the growth scenario is concerned, there's a number of windfall things that could happen to us. I think that as far as the large things are concerned, a lot of it has to do with what supply is available in other places. And a lot of municipalities in Oregon are starting to look at their industrial land supply. And, we've had developers sit at the table over there and tell us that it's like, well, we were the last reasonable amount of acreage that was available pretty much in the metro area. The rest of it had been eaten up. And so I have a feeling that, also with all the talk of Intel leaving the region, I have a feeling that we're going to be getting a little more competition to fill up any industrial land that we might zone for that than we might have seen in the past few years. Because I believe our industrial park kind of sat for quite a while before people started biting at it, and then when they took a big bite, it kept coming. I'm not sure that's going to continue if other municipalities decide to open up. Looking at the economy, I have a feeling that there's going to be some incentivizing going on by other governments. So medium is probably a good place for us. The one thing I was looking at on the, let's see, there was the list, two-page list of items that we were also looking at for this section.
This guy right here?
Yes.
Okay.
All of those look good to me. They all seem to be kind of, except for where we're dealing specifically with where we're going to put industrial land, everything else seems to be like almost boilerplate as far as, what you want your community to do. Piggybacking on Commissioner Jarosh, as far as that last list was concerned, I'm going to continue to beat the drum about pedestrian connections. It's hard to get around town. And especially if you're in, going through communities that have come into the urban growth piecemeal, sidewalks are come and go. And it would be nice if we could do something other than wait until property changes hands to do something about that. But, I'm not sure what to do about that. I think that it's kind of a hindrance to the vitality of our downtown, making it so that everyone has to drive here. Because it's really not that far from a lot of places that just don't have sidewalks. So I think that's all I have.
Thank you. Commissioner Llewellyn.
I'll back up to something Judy said. I think in terms of, I absolutely agree with her. I mean, I think we need to go back and analyze, the results of what happened. And I was part of that first industrial park that you have. And when you look at that and what went on, I mean, the city filled the business owners, the property owners out there miserably. When the property owners have to get together and raise $100,000 for a land use attorney to come and explain to Canby that it was their industrial park, not the property owners, Canby failed us. And so the problem is you make all these decisions and then 20 years later, it's a whole new body. And then people, oh my God, we don't want the town to grow. Well, again, it's that education piece that the town already grew. You're here, right? People are here. And we really need to zero in. It's businesses don't cause growth. It's people that cause growth. But it's, part of this planning is, it's just very vital that, it's neat to say we want to expand east and north of Malino, but if we don't get those property owners involved, and that was one of the big issues back in the first phase, is we were never brought involved with that. The city just did it to us. So here we are hung out in the growth boundary, but outside the city limits. That was a nightmare, and it caused a lot of grief for people, and it affected a lot of people health-wise as well. So I don't want to see that. It's really important that wherever areas we're going, we have got to pull those property owners in and say, hey, do you know we're talking about this? Number one. And, the first question I had was, who's going to pay for all this crap? And that was never, when they passed that land use plan, they had to, when I raised that objection, they had to pull that out because nobody ever thought about it. If you think your property owner is going to pay all that infrastructure out there, think again. And, we have to remember, and people that don't like growth, they come in and they start raising objections to this. Somehow we just all need to remember 20 years from now, this is Canby's park, not the property owner's park. And so we need to provide, I think part of this planning needs to be, how the city and it needs to be written down somewhere. So 20 years, we can't forget about it. That, what is that mechanism the property owner can go about? One of the things we tried to do is have the city be the lead, take on the lead to annex all that property in. The property owners would have gotten out of those back taxes, but we could have turned around and used that. It was $25 million in infrastructure costs. And everybody wanted us to pay for a good chunk of that. Well, when you're taking, some of those people out there might have been, there's probably 2 people out there that got rich off this whole thing. But when you have a house and a farm, and the farm's giving you $40,000 a year, and now you're making that worthless. So the minute you expand this and then put those people in the growth boundary for some other objective other than farming, you've just made those houses and farms worthless. And these people better understand that, because we sure did. Nobody told us this. And so I'm going to be adamant about this. We need to tread very carefully on this.
Commissioner Llewellyn, all good points. I think that the property owner outreach is critical on a number of fronts. I think one is interest, which is going to be a little bit in advance here of the comp plan, but Interest is going to be a significant item. If people are not interested, that clearly is an indication that the city should not be pursuing that. If they are interested, so there's a bunch of layers here to this, but I think all really important points about the plan for services, which I think is a big component of this whole discussion. I'm not sure exactly where that level of detail is going to lie. There's going to definitely be some of that in the comp plan and the transportation system plan. The comprehensive plan will address system development charges and utilities and availability, and the transportation system plan will address roads. There'll be definitely some elements there. There may also be a need for what's called a concept plan, which goes beyond the comp plan and which gets into the specifics of that. And again, some of this needs to be kind of worked through as we go through the next 2 years. But in my mind, clearly property owners are super important in this discussion. It's going to take time to kind of get to that discussion, so it will not happen until we get to the next fiscal year, because there's a bunch of background reports. That's not even really part of the discussion until next fiscal year, but it is an important one, and there's a lot of things to consider here. Availability, utilities, roads, who pays for those, level of service, what's anticipated. Those are all big parts of it, and beyond that are soils and farm availability, of the nature of the farmland, et cetera. That's also an analysis that would have to happen as well. So there's a bunch of layers here that need to all be included, but your points are well taken.
Yeah, annexation costs, back tax costs,
Yeah.
all these need to be on the table, and
Yeah.
there needs to be a plan agreed on by the city and the property owners now, not 20 years from now.
Yep. Well, and I think I'm hoping things have evolved significantly, and I know that planning was maybe not as mature back in the day, and I'm not making excuses for what happened since I wasn't here, but I think that the level of transparency I would hope would be much, much greater in this whole exercise.
Well, as long as I'm around, it will be. That's all.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Llewellyn. Vice Chair Ewert.
Yeah, I'm looking at this list that we've got up here in front of us, and I think these are all great things. I think item number 3 on this list should be, if these are in a priority, which I don't think they are, but number 3 on that list is pretty high on my priority list. But I want to back up to what Judy Jarosz said, Commissioner Jarosz said about our scorecard, where we've been, what we've done. We look at this whole thing, in my humble opinion, we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. Whether it be cottage houses, whether it be industrial parks or everything, Canby's been doing this for a lot of years. And we've got some things that work, some things that don't. We tried the mixed use thing here on the north side, and it didn't work so well. It didn't really turn out the way we thought that it would turn out. So we look at that, we say, okay, what are we going to do with mixed use moving forward? We look at the industrial park, and one of the things of retain and attract businesses that provide quality jobs with high levels of employment per acre. That was one of the top things when we did the industrial park years ago. And then we turned right around and we put in a distribution center that we lowered our number way down to get that in here. Now, I got nothing against the distribution center. We've got it, it's here, and it's, I'm sure they're good neighbors, but that wasn't the goal. And so I think we need to look back. I think using the thing of a scorecard is really good. And I would encourage the planning staff to just kind of, and all these committees that are kind of coming up with all this stuff, to fall back and look at this and say, where have we been? What have we done? What's worked? What hasn't worked? And move forward with that. It is, I have no problem with new and great ideas, but I have a great big problem with wasting a bunch of time and resources on trying to create another axle on our ship here that we don't need. And so I really, really think that it would behoove us to sit back, look at what we've done. Mr. Llewellyn said very good. You know, we stumbled with some of those landowners. I know we did. And how that all happened and so on and so forth. That's the stuff we need to be looking at. We need to look at what's worked, what hasn't worked. And I don't think that this process is going to be very difficult to come up with some solutions. And like Judy said, it just we just need to just take a minute, step back and look at it. And so, you know, all of these things here, I'm looking at 6 items here. I know there was more on the next one, on the next page. There's some good things, some bad things. I would caution us very much on going down the road of trying to get growth by setting tax base aside. I think that there's a lot of communities that have gotten in a lot of trouble doing that kind of stuff. And 20 years down the road, it hurts us. So I just think that there's things that we've done well. Canby's a great place to live, and I think that there's things we've done well. There's things that we haven't done well. We need to learn by our mistakes and focus on the things that we've done well. So I have no problem with these things. Expand lodging, you bet. We need to have more hotels. That's great. I don't think that's not necessarily something the planning commission is going to decide for somebody, is pick somebody to build a hotel, but we definitely need to have the locations for those places to go. And these things are all nice. But like I said, I think if we look at the types of housing we've got and so on and so forth, I think it's going to boil down to more a matter of tweaking than it is developing new. That's all I got to say.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vice Chair Ewert. Don, any final thoughts on what
There will be
everybody's going?
obviously more discussion coming. This is an introductory to this. I don't have an exact timeline, but I thought this would be important to kind of, again, reassess to some degree where we've been and kind of where we're going. And then the Planning Commission, I think, is a very valuable tool in this process. You obviously will be involved as well. Some of you may be even more involved in the comp plan going forward in other ways. So more to come on that as well. And just that's really it for tonight.
Just because the item came up on multiple fronts there, this idea of a scorecard. What can planning staff do to contextualize that a little bit to kind of meet the need of what the other commissioners have brought up?
I think that we obviously can look back in time. I think perhaps, that's important, all those things, and I took copious notes about what hasn't worked. We need to look at why that hasn't worked. I think that's important in terms of were the standards wrong? Was it the wrong location? That could all be vetted through this process. And then going forward, I really like to get back to this kind of what are we trying to achieve, which is the purpose and need of this. And that again gets into market that we're trying to establish, like, okay, maybe it isn't a truly affordable house, as you pointed out, where the 20 to 30 something generation can afford it, but maybe the 30 to 40 generation can afford it. And maybe that is success for Canby. Mm-hmm. That is part of that process as well.
Okay. Moving on then, or closing out on this agenda item and moving on to items of interest.
So for the next Planning Commission meeting, we'll have another work session. That'll be a Planning Commission on Planning Commission processes and procedures. It's kind of a refresher. Some of you have had this before. Joe Lindsay, our attorney, and I will be presenting on that. And there will be, as I mentioned, on March 13th, the Housing Production Strategy hearing for Planning Commission, and then also Planning Commission hearing on March 27th for the Economic Opportunity Analysis. And that's really all I had.
Okay. 27. Okay, and then items of interest or guidance from Planning Commission. Commissioner Jarosz, do you have anything you want to bring up at this time?
Hey, yeah, thank you. I have a quick, simple thing. It's a process thing. It sounds silly, but I would like numbers on the slide, page numbers, like page X of X. I've had this request before, and for me, it's a part of good meeting management. Are we halfway through the deck? Are we 10% through the deck? It helps us kind of know what sometimes happens is we spend most of our time on the first 2 slides, and then we realize, oh, we've got 20 more slides. And since we don't always get the slide deck in advance, I just think that would be helpful for meeting management to know where are we at in the discussion. But you know me, I'm in it for the long haul. I don't miss meetings, and I understand we all need to have our say, and sometimes that means we go long. But if we could put numbers on the deck slides, and I've asked that of the consultants as well, because they have the same problem. You can't tell, am I sitting down for a 50-slide presentation or a 20-slide presentation? I think it's just helpful for meeting management, so that's my simple request.
So noted, thank you.
Commissioner Llewellyn, any items of interest?
No, I think Commissioner Jarosz, that's a great idea. I'm good.
Thank you. Commissioner Hutchinson?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Ewert?
I'm good. Thank you, Don. It was a good presentation.
Thank you.
It was excellent.
Thank you, Judy.
Okay, if there are nothing or no other items out there, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion that we adjourn the February 13th meeting.
I'll second.
Okay, and Don, would you prefer to see the roll call for the adjournment?
No.
Okay, I think we're all in as an aye. I think we're good. Thank you, City of Canby. Good evening.